Look, Mom, it's not personal, but if you want the final funding for the business to clear, you'll sign this too. My son, Caleb, said the words with the casual apathy of someone demanding an extra napkin, not a signature that would effectively wipe 20 years of my life off the map. I want you to picture the scene. A Tuesday evening, the dining room of the home I designed myself, a masterpiece of glass and warm mahogany, quiet now save for the faint clinking of silverware. I was hosting Caleb and his fiancée, Serafina, ostensibly to discuss the final touches on their ridiculous, multi-million-dollar Italian destination wedding. But the atmosphere was less family dinner and more corporate acquisition meeting. If you're asking me what kind of mother sacrifices a potential Pritzker Prize and a career building skyscrapers in Dubai to raise her son solo after her husband walks out, you're looking at her. I am Adeline Vance, and I designed my life around Caleb. That house, that career I shelved, it was all his inheritance, his safety net. I'm 64 years old. I might have stepped back from my firm, but my mind is still sharper than any cutting edge I ever drew on a blueprint. I wear my gray hair short, tailored, and my posture still holds the rigidity of someone who spent decades barking orders at construction foremen. I looked across that expensive table at the two of them, Caleb, who carried himself with the entitled swagger of someone who never had to earn a dollar, and Serafina, who resembled a perfectly polished, expensive doll, her eyes focused only on the spreadsheet he'd slid toward me. The document was labeled Transfer of Assets and Liability Release. Not exactly a sweet little note about cake flavors. I felt that familiar, cold knot twist in my stomach, the one that started 3 years ago when Caleb convinced me to sell off my remaining shares in the firm and pump the capital into his ill-conceived tech startup, NovaFlow. He promised me the world, promised to pay me back, promised I'd be his silent, trusted partner. You know the drill. What exactly is this, Caleb? I asked, my voice dangerously level. I didn't touch the pen. I knew from the moment I saw Serafina's smug, satisfied smirk that this wasn't just about another loan. This was a cleanup job. It's a formality, Mom. Caleb waved a dismissive hand, annoyed that I was interrupting his risotto. Serafina's uncle's fund is finally ready to buy out the minority partners, the ones with the original seed funding. This just transfers your initial capital investment in NovaFlow, plus the last few top-ups, into a single, comprehensive equity stake, and then releases the liability. It protects everyone. It's what Serafina's family requires to inject their money and get the company profitable for the wedding fund. The wedding fund. That phrase hit me like a misplaced foundation slab. My decades of work, my entire financial legacy, reduced to a line item on a wedding budget designed by a 27-year-old socialite who wore her engagement ring like a weapon. The truth is, NovaFlow wasn't just struggling. It was a hollow, expensive shell, and I knew it. Caleb was about to go bankrupt, and Serafina's family was swooping in for the steal, demanding my capital as the price of admission. I picked up the heavy, silver pen, but didn't sign. I was scanning the fine print, the legalese blurring into a language I never wanted to speak. The document ensured that, in exchange for the final cash infusion, I would sign away any future claim on the company's success, and specifically, any future right to participate in its management or decision-making. I would be entirely, financially erased from the business I had been bled dry to sustain. So, you're asking me to sign away my position and my capital, which totals nearly $10 million, as a final cash infusion for a company that hasn't earned a profit in 18 months, simply so you two can get married in Tuscany? I asked, meeting Serafina's ice-cold gaze. This is where the humiliation, the truly gut-wrenching moment of realization, struck. Serafina leaned forward, abandoning all pretense of politeness. Her tone wasn't sharp, it was surgically precise. And by the way, Adeline, she chimed in, using my first name like a reprimand. Caleb and I have decided, in the interest of keeping the ceremony extremely intimate and curated, to make the wedding strictly parent-free. It's a trend in our circle, less distraction, more focus on us. It wasn't a discussion. It wasn't an apology. It was a statement delivered right after they had financially cornered me. They were demanding my entire worth, then banning me from the event it was financing, claiming I was a distraction. My vision narrowed. I felt the blood rush from my face. It wasn't the $10 million, though believe me, that hurt. It was the profound, stunning lack of respect. It was the absolute confirmation that my son no longer saw me as his mother, but as a resource to be tapped, exploited, and then discarded when I became inconvenient. They hadn't just banned me from a ceremony. They had banned me from my son's life on the very day they were building a new one with my money. Parent-free, I repeated, testing the foreign texture of the phrase on my tongue. I felt a slow, terrible cold spread through my chest, chilling the warm risotto. You mean mother-free? Because I know your parents are already flying to Florence. Caleb quickly interjected, trying to look conflicted, but failing miserably. It's complicated, Mom. Serafina's family is sponsoring the whole day, and they just want consistency. And frankly, with the documents and the business sale, it might just be easier for everyone if you took a step back from the social aspects for a while. A step back from the social aspects. They were telling me that my presence, the mother who had given him everything, was a liability on their Instagram grid. I placed the silver pen back down, neatly parallel to the document. I stood up, pushing my chair back slowly, the scrape of wood on the marble floor deafening. I looked at Caleb, my son, the boy I used to read blueprints to when he couldn't sleep, and saw a stranger, molded by the brittle ambition of the woman beside him. I won't sign this tonight, I stated, my voice low and firm, the voice of the architect who knew how to halt a multi-billion-dollar project with 3 words. You both leave now. And I suggest you do not schedule any vendors, plane tickets, or legal fund transfers relying on this signature. Because, Caleb, you have just crossed the one line I didn't think you were capable of crossing. I watched them scramble, Caleb annoyed, Serafina instantly calculating. They took their papers, their smug expressions faltering only slightly under the sudden frost in my home. As the front door closed, leaving me alone with the silence of my impeccably designed solitude, I walked straight to my old drawing room. I looked at the framed certificate, a major award from the International Association of Architects, signed by my mentor, Elias Thorne. Elias, who had always told me I was wasting my genius on suburbia. He was an architect, yes, but he became a renowned specialist in complex financial litigation for high-net-worth individuals after a bad personal experience. I reached for the phone, my hand steady despite the earthquake in my heart. They wanted to erase me with a contract? Fine. I might be banned from their wedding, but I was about to become a major, undeniable problem for their future. They wanted to play corporate acquisition with my heart and my money. They had no idea. They just triggered the most ruthless financial architect they would ever meet. This wasn't just about reclaiming $10 million, it was about reclaiming Adeline Vance. And the blueprint for that reclamation started tonight. They had just hired my funds for their wedding. I was about to hire a lawyer for my life. I have a feeling you're going to want to see how this building comes down, aren't you? I sure do. He won't just sue you for breach of fiduciary duty, Adeline. He'll bury the company and blame you for the collapse. That's what Elias Thorne told me at 7 a.m. the next morning, confirming that my $10 million problem was actually a $50 million disaster. If you're wondering why I was sitting in my architect's drawing room at dawn, holding the phone like a grenade, it was because sleep felt like a moral failing. The night before, after Caleb and Serafina left, the silence in the house didn't feel like peace. It felt like a vacuum where my identity used to be. I called Elias almost immediately, catching him between his usual morning swim and his first barrage of Wall Street litigation. Elias is exactly what you imagine a powerhouse corporate litigator to be: sharp suit, sharper mind, and a voice that sounds like expensive scotch, calm, smoky, and dangerously persuasive. He was also the only person who understood the full depth of the career I had abandoned. He didn't offer sympathy, he offered strategy. That liability release you didn't sign, Adeline? It was their insurance policy, Elias explained over the phone. It confirms that all your previous cash infusions were equity investments, making you liable for a percentage of NovaFlow's operational debt if the company fails before the buyout. Serafina's family wasn't just buying the company for cheap. They were forcing you to assume the risk of its imminent failure. If you had signed it, you'd have lost the capital but been free of the debt. By refusing, you're still a minority partner, legally on the hook. The room suddenly felt smaller. The elegant, cathedral-like ceiling, which usually made me feel expansive and clear-headed, seemed to press in on me. I looked around my drawing room, my sanctuary. The scent of aged cedar and oil pastels usually calmed me, but now it just felt like the smell of a forgotten past. This was the room where I had drafted plans for towers that scraped the sky. Now, I was trying to draft an exit strategy from a maternal disaster. So, they weren't just taking my money for the wedding, Elias. They were hanging me out to dry for the debt. Precisely. Serafina knows how to play dirty. Caleb? He's just the useful idiot in this equation. Now, here's what we need. We need to prove that your contributions were loans with equity options, not straight equity. Did you keep any original promissory notes? Any email exchange where Caleb explicitly calls it a loan or repayment? And that's where the first crack in Adeline Vance's perfect facade appeared. You see, when you trust someone absolutely, especially your own child, you get sloppy. I had never treated my contributions to Caleb's business as a formal, arm's-length transaction. It was motherly support, written on checks or wired with a note like, "For your future, darling." I had the wire transfers, yes, but the paper that detailed the repayment terms? They were buried. Probably filed in one of the 20 custom-built, unlabeled mahogany file drawers lining this room. My normal life had been one of immaculate order. Every blueprint, every correspondence, every conceptual sketch was filed precisely. But the financial documents related to NovaFlow? Those I had kept separate, hidden behind the architectural plans for the Santiago Library, as if shielding my own financial foolishness from the scrutiny of my organized genius. I hung up with Elias, the severity of my situation sharpening my focus. The suspense now wasn't waiting for the next attack. It was finding the defense before the attack came. I started my search. This wasn't the thrilling, sensory work of conceptualizing a structure. This was the dusty, meticulous work of archaeology. I pulled out drawer after drawer, the fine silt of old paper clinging to my fingertips. I passed a framed picture of Caleb at 8 years old, sitting on the scaffolding of one of my early projects, his helmet comically large. His face was dirty, grinning, pure, trusting adoration. Now, that same face was twisted by greed. The tension wasn't just external, it was internal. Every file I touched was a monument to my misplaced devotion. The theme, now shouting from the rafters, was that trust without verification is a liability. Hours later, the sun was fully up. I had stacks of documents on the floor, all useless, when my phone vibrated. It wasn't Elias. It was a one-line text message from a block number. "You had your chance to be quiet. Don't ruin everything." It was Serafina. No signature, no flowery language. Just a cold, calculated threat. The humiliation of the previous night suddenly reignited into a furious, white-hot resolve. They weren't just going to take my money, they were going to intimidate me into silence. They were counting on the maternal guilt, on the fear that my fighting back would ruin Caleb's life. I laughed, a short, sharp sound that echoed in the high-ceilinged room. Ruin everything? They had already ruined the relationship beyond repair. The only thing left to save was my own dignity. And Elias was right. Caleb was the useful idiot, but Serafina was the antagonist, the precise, high-heeled heel grinding my neck into the polished mahogany floor. I dug deeper into the last, deepest drawer. My fingers scraped against the back panel. I remember tucking a small, leather-bound book back here, behind a roll of ancient vellum, years ago. This wasn't a ledger. It was my personal journal from the year I first gave Caleb the money, a place where I often transcribed financial agreements and thoughts, using a private, encrypted shorthand only I understood. If any document detailed the true nature of the agreement, it would be in the notes surrounding the date of the first wire transfer. My heart hammered against my ribs, a dull, powerful drumbeat against the silence. This little book, smelling faintly of the antique leather it was bound in, was my last hope. I didn't open it yet. I held it, feeling the weight of $10 million and a lifetime of motherhood in my hands. The next move wasn't a negotiation, it was a counterdesign. And I knew that little book held the key to the ultimate plot twist, my complete, brutal, and necessary self-reclamation. Serafina wanted me to be quiet. Adeline Vance was about to become deafening. I have it, Elias. The date is August 14th, 3 years ago. It says, Caleb needed the first wire for the server farm. Memo: $3 million loan, convertible to 15% equity at first major funding round, principal to be repaid within 5 years or upon acquisition. This is for his future, not mine. It's in my shorthand, but it's unequivocal. The words tasted like cold steel, sharp and absolute. The leather-bound journal lay open on my desk, its pages worn and slightly brittle. Finding it the night before had been a moment of visceral, physical relief, a weight lifted from my soul, replaced by the weight of absolute truth. Holding it now, under the unforgiving morning light of my drawing room, was like holding the key to a bomb I had accidentally armed. The drawing room was no longer my sanctuary, it was my war room. Where once there were rolls of pristine vellum and architectural models, there were now legal pads, printouts of NovaFlow's anemic financial statements, and the faint, bitter scent of black coffee gone cold. The setting, once reflective of my serene, organized life, now echoed the chaos in my mind, elegant surfaces covered in messy, disruptive evidence. That's exactly what we need, Adeline, Elias confirmed, the sound of keyboard clicks audible through the phone. He was already drafting. This journal confirms intent. It proves you never signed away your right to repayment. It immediately reclassifies the entire $10 million as a promissory note, not a simple investment. Which means Caleb's attempt to transfer the debt liability to you under the guise of an equity release is fraud. And Serafina's little NDA scheme collapses. I felt a surge of adrenaline, cold and clean. For the first time since that disastrous dinner, I was operating on a footing I understood: strategy. I was no longer the exploited mother. I was the architect, planning the demolition of a poorly constructed scheme. What is the next step? I asked, pacing the length of my floor, the expensive Persian rug, now just a measure of distance. We send a formal letter tomorrow, demanding full accounting and confirming the status of your capital as a secured loan. We let them know we're ready to fight. And Adeline, you have to prepare for the backlash. They're going to panic. Serafina is going to come for you, and she won't be subtle. Elias's prediction arrived with terrifying promptness. Not 10 minutes after I hung up, my phone screamed with an unfamiliar number. My gut clenched, recognizing the enemy before I even answered. I picked up. The voice on the other end was Serafina's, but stripped of the syrupy pleasantries she used in public. It was pure, icy hostility. Adeline, what in God's name are you doing? Caleb just told me you called some lawyer. Her directness was almost admirable in its villainy. She didn't waste time on preambles. This was the main conflict unleashed. I'm protecting my assets, Serafina, I replied, settling into my most professional, impenetrable tone. Your acquisition strategy for NovaFlow involved the assumption of my liabilities. That is not a legal transaction. That is extortion. And I do not respond well to extortion. There was a high, tight laugh on the other end, the sound of expensive champagne being spilled. Extortion? Adeline, please. This is business. Or rather, this is what happens when a 60-year-old woman tries to cling to the coattails of her son's success. You keep that $10 million locked up, and Caleb's company collapses. Do you really want to be the reason your son is blacklisted from this industry? Do you want to ruin his wedding, which, by the way, he already told me you're not invited to? The insult stung, not because it was news, but because of the sheer contempt in her voice. She was wielding my maternal love as her primary weapon. She was banking on my emotional breakdown, on the ingrained reflex of a mother to prioritize her son's happiness over her own survival. I didn't ban myself from the wedding, Serafina. You and Caleb did that. I was willing to sacrifice the $10 million and more as a wedding gift. What I am not willing to do is take on your family's debt when they eventually bail on NovaFlow. I have the documents, Serafina. The original terms. It was a loan, and now I'm calling it in. The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with her sudden, calculating fear. You don't have documents, she finally hissed, the composure cracking. We made sure they were all digital. They're gone. You're bluffing. I'm an architect, dear. I believe in hard copies. And I believe in recording my intent in the clearest possible terms. You see, when you design a structure, every steel beam must be accounted for. You can't just rely on pretty promises. Now, you tell Caleb this. I will not sign the release. The wedding is in 2 weeks. If the $10 million plus 3 years of interest is not scheduled for transfer back to my account within 7 days, my lawyer will file a lien against NovaFlow that will freeze every single asset and make your buyout impossible. I felt the power shift. Her silence was proof. The conflict was no longer subtle. It was a full-blown declaration of war. My life was completely and utterly disrupted. My routine of quiet contemplation and design was replaced by the anxiety of litigation and the moral horror of fighting my own son. But beneath the anxiety was a core of icy certainty. They had forced me to choose between my motherhood and my personhood. And I was choosing the latter. This is not over, Adeline, Serafina spat, her final words dripping with poison. You will regret this. I already regretted trusting you both. I shot back, hanging up before she could respond. The finality of the click was immensely satisfying. I sat back, breathing deeply. The scent of coffee and old paper was replaced by the metallic tang of adrenaline. I realized I was trembling, not from fear, but from the raw, intoxicating power of self-advocacy. The seed of the climax was planted. The deadline was set, the threat was issued, and the lawyer, Elias Thorne, was now officially in motion. They had banned the mother from the wedding. They were about to meet the architect of their downfall. And I hadn't even worn my good suit yet. Are you seriously going to do this to me, Mom? You're going to use a lawyer to try and ruin me 2 weeks before my wedding. Caleb's voice was a ragged, strangled mess, the exact sound that used to make me drop everything and run to his side when he was a child with a scraped knee. That was the escalation I knew was coming. Serafina had finished her corporate threats, and now Caleb was deployed, using the nuclear option, guilt. He called me the day after I hung up on Serafina, his number finally coming through, signaling that this was personal, that the gloves were off. If you're wondering what that felt like, it felt like having a perfectly balanced structure, a lifetime of maternal sacrifice, suddenly hit by a tremor from the foundation. I was standing in my kitchen, a space usually dedicated to precision and calm, and my hands were shaking so hard I had to put down the delicate porcelain mug I was holding. Caleb, you know that this is entirely about the contract you presented me, I said, trying to keep my own voice steady, trying to sound like the CEO and not the grieving mother. The one that asked me to assume $50 million in debt liability. That is not love, darling. That is not a wedding gift. That is a hostile takeover. It's business. And if you just sign the papers, the whole thing would be over. Uncle Paul is furious. He's going to pull the funding, and NovaFlow is going to collapse, Mom. We'll be bankrupt. Dad wouldn't have done this. He would have protected me. That was the personal attack. Bringing his late father, my estranged, faithless husband, into the conversation. That was Serafina's coaching, crystal clear. My former husband was the ghost in the machine, and Caleb was using him as a weapon against my heart, knowing that my overcompensation as a single mother was driven by the guilt of his father's absence. My eyes burned, but I absolutely refused to cry. I could hear a subtle, tinny quality in Caleb's voice, like he was on speakerphone, which meant Serafina was sitting right there listening, watching the emotional fallout. You tell Serafina that bringing your father into this doesn't help your case, Caleb. And if you weren't hiding behind predatory contracts, the business would be fine. I have proof that the funds were a loan, and I am enforcing the repayment terms. You have 7 days to return the capital. He dropped the pleading and moved straight to the accusation, his voice suddenly sharp and full of spite, the true influence of Serafina shining through. This isn't about money. This is about control. You're angry you weren't invited to the wedding, and now you want to ruin my life because you can't stand not being the center of attention. You are a selfish, bitter old woman, Adeline. And you will be totally alone when I'm done with you. The line went dead. The silence this time was heavier than the last. It wasn't just the absence of noise. It was the chilling confirmation that the boy I raised was capable of such cold cruelty. The struggle was overwhelming. My body ached with the urge to call him back, to apologize, to cave in just to stop the pain, to mend the bond, no matter the cost. This is the flaw of a devoted mother, you see, the belief that one more sacrifice will finally buy peace. But I remembered Elias's instructions. I called him immediately, shaking with a mix of fury and devastation. Adeline, listen to me. Breathe, Elias commanded, his voice a steady anchor in the storm. That was a tactical maneuver. He didn't call to reconcile. He called to intimidate you into silence before the filing deadline. If you fold now, you confirm everything they think about you, that your love is a weakness they can always exploit. Elias knew the depth of my maternal struggle. He knew I had the emotional leverage to stop the lawsuit, but that I'd be trading my financial freedom and self-respect for an illusion of harmony. They called me selfish, I whispered, the word feeling like a brand. You are not selfish, Adeline. You are finally practicing self-preservation. That is not a flaw, it is a necessity. The documents are ready to go. You must hold the line. If you cave now, they will never respect you, and the debt will always hang over your head. You would be sacrificing your future to fund their greed. His words, like a beautifully rendered architectural drawing, brought clarity to the emotional wreckage. Elias reinforced the theme. The cost of true love should not be your complete self-erasure. I spent the rest of the day in a state of hypervigilance, unable to focus on anything but the impending deadline. My home, usually a place of refuge, now felt like a gilded cage. I was trapped between my past, the selfless mother, and my necessary future, the ruthless protector of Adeline Vance. The final act of that painful day was the hardest. I called my bank. To prevent Caleb or Serafina from attempting any last-minute maneuvers, perhaps claiming I'd promised a specific asset, I systematically moved every accessible liquid asset into an offshore trust managed by Elias. It was a cold, calculated move that physically cut the financial umbilical cord between me and my son. As I hung up the phone after completing the last wire transfer, I looked at the dark windows of my drawing room. I felt utterly alone, isolated by the choice I had made. But there was also a sliver of ice-cold strength. Caleb had tried to break me with emotional blackmail. He failed. The architect had been tested, and she did not crumble. The deadline was fast approaching. And when that deadline passed, the game would shift entirely. I was ready to send the lawyers in, and I knew exactly what that meant. The start of the final design. The problem isn't just that they're broke, Adeline. The problem is they're visibly not broke. Elias's voice crackled slightly over the phone, adding a digital static to the growing tension. I was sitting in the bustling outdoor courtyard of my friend Beatrice's gallery, sipping coffee and trying to maintain the facade of a woman simply enjoying a beautiful spring day. Beatrice, a vibrant sculptor who knew the sting of betrayal in her own life, had insisted I leave the war room for some fresh air. What are you talking about, Elias? NovaFlow's financials are disastrous. The vendor list for the wedding is 5 pages long. They are functionally insolvent, I countered, running my finger over the marble tabletop. I'm talking about appearances, and appearances are everything in Serafina's world, Elias explained. I've cross-referenced some of her public social media posts with NovaFlow's expense reports. She's been charging a staggering amount of personal lifestyle purchases to the company card, couture fittings, private jet rentals for scouting the Tuscan venue, even the down payment on their new Tribeca penthouse apartment. It's all thinly disguised as client entertainment or pre-IPO marketing strategy. If we bring this to the court now, they'll cry that you, the minority partner, are maliciously destroying the company by exposing trade secrets or, worse, by ruining their market optics right before a major investment. This was the plot complication I hadn't anticipated. Serafina wasn't just leveraging Caleb's ambition, she was actively using my capital to fund an extravagant life, then insulating herself with the veneer of corporate necessity. This deepens the theme. The difference between real value, my sacrifice, and manufactured worth, their luxury lifestyle. Beatrice, who had been listening to half the conversation through the earpiece I couldn't cover, leaned in after I hung up. Beatrice is my grounding wire, a woman who trades in truth, both in her art and her friendships. She's building a fortress out of glamour, Addie, Beatrice said, stirring her espresso fiercely. She knows appearances protect them. If they look successful, people buy the lie. That's her masterpiece. And Caleb is letting her do it. I sighed, the coffee tasting suddenly bitter. He's always been susceptible to glamour. It's why he chose an empty concept like NovaFlow over solid structural engineering. He chases the shine, not the substance. This observation led me to a crucial subplot, an old connection that could give me the insight I needed into Serafina's true motives and financial history. Beatrice, do you still see Leo Hawthorne? I asked. Leo was a slick, mid-level finance broker who used to date Serafina years ago, before Caleb entered the picture. Leo ran with the same highly leveraged, image-obsessed crowd. Beatrice stiffened. Leo? We cross paths at openings sometimes. He's still a toad, but a well-informed toad. Why? Serafina's family is positioning this buyout as their philanthropic rescue of NovaFlow. I need to know if Serafina has a history of these rescue maneuvers, or if she's just targeting desperate men for their remaining cash flow. If Leo knows anything about her pre-Caleb financial maneuvers, it would give Elias a pattern of predatory behavior. The stakes immediately rose. Engaging Leo Hawthorne meant stepping outside the controlled legal battle and wading into the murky waters of social espionage. Beatrice's face softened with a conspiratorial grin. She was in. I'll host a small, discreet showing next week. A few minor collectors, minimal fuss. Leo will be there. You can accidentally cross paths, she said, her eyes glinting with artistic mischief. But Addie, be careful. That woman doesn't just burn bridges. She detonates them. Later that evening, back in my war room, the plot complication grew sharper. Caleb sent me a frantic text message deluge, not asking for forgiveness, but asking for access to my old Swiss safe deposit box. Mom, look, I know you're mad, but I need the original blueprints for the Santiago project. Uncle Paul asked to see them. He thinks it will prove I can handle a major infrastructure pitch. It's a huge opportunity. Please don't block this. It's my last chance. This was a classic manipulation move and a frightening escalation. Why would Serafina's wealthy uncle, a tech financier, not an architect, suddenly need my old, unrelated architectural plans? The subtle tension from Chapter 2 was now a thick rope of suspicion. I walked over to the back of the drawing room, to the large, steel-plated safe hidden behind the wall-sized reproduction of one of my conceptual sketches. That safe held all my truly sensitive documents, including the one key piece of physical evidence that Serafina couldn't delete, a certified copy of the original articles of incorporation for NovaFlow that named me as a founder and secured creditor, not just an investor. I realized then that Caleb wasn't just desperate for a handout. He was actively searching for my final, hidden piece of leverage. They knew I had something physical and they wanted it gone. This request wasn't about a pitch. It was a distraction, a chance to get inside my defense perimeter. My fingers traced the cold steel of the safe. The foreshadowing of the climax was now crystal clear. The fight wouldn't just be fought in the courtrooms. It would be fought right here, in my home, over a physical object. They wanted the last vestige of my power, and I was about to use it to expose the core of their deceit. I needed that meeting with Leo. I needed the full blueprint of Serafina's history before I made my final move. The architect was preparing her ultimate structural failure report. He got into the safe, Adeline.
Somehow.
That certified copy of the Articles of Incorporation? It's gone. When Elias Thorne delivered that news, it wasn't a shock. It was a physical blow, a stunning realization that the betrayal had not just escalated, but had violated the absolute sanctity of my private fortress. I was sitting in Elias's sleek, intimidatingly minimal office, overlooking the entire city. The setting, all glass, chrome, and calculated power, suddenly felt like a mockery of my own vulnerability. The day before, I had refused Caleb's plea for the Santiago blueprints, but I hadn't anticipated his persistence or his willingness to commit a criminal act.
How?
I whispered, the turmoil in my chest making my voice raspy. The safe requires 3 distinct codes. Only I knew the third. Elias leaned forward, his expression grave. He didn't need the codes. He used a professional safecracker. The police report confirms no forced entry, but the internal mechanisms show a partial override. He must have done it while you were out yesterday, perhaps when you were with Beatrice. That request for the blueprints wasn't a distraction, Adeline. It was a timing probe. The cunning of the antagonist, Serafina, shone through brilliantly. She had engineered the need for me to leave the house, the gallery meeting with Beatrice, and then used Caleb to execute the B&E. And Caleb had obeyed. This wasn't just a plot complication, it was a profound personal failure. Adeline Vance, the architect who prided herself on foresight and structural integrity, had missed the most critical structural weakness of all, the broken trust with my son. I hadn't simply been exploited. I had been betrayed by my own blood, who had willingly hired someone to violate my private space and steal the single document that proved his initial good faith.
He stole from me.
He broke into my home. That inner dialogue was a scream, tearing through my composure. The document was replaceable, perhaps, but the realization of Caleb's actions was a gut-wrenching, seismic emotional shock. Elias, sensing my internal collapse, immediately shifted gears. It's a serious setback, but not fatal. It proves malicious intent on their side, which we can use. But it confirms Serafina is playing hardball, and Caleb is her willing accomplice. He is choosing her, Adeline. He is choosing the lie. His blunt assessment was necessary, brutal, and heartbreaking. The theme of maternal sacrifice versus self-worth was hammered home. I had protected him from the world, and he had allowed the world, in the form of Serafina, to break into my heart. My hands clenched into fists, the fingernails biting into my palms. I felt a cold, furious determination set in, replacing the despair. Fine, I said, standing up, my elegance returning, stiff and weaponized. They want to play illegal asset recovery? We shift the strategy. Elias, how quickly can you obtain an emergency injunction against Serafina's family fund? We can't rely on the physical document anymore. We go for the financial jugular. Elias paused, pulling up documents on his screen. I can file an emergency petition tomorrow. We have the journal, we have the wire transfers, and now we have the police report confirming the break-in, which implies they believe the document was critical, bolstering our claim. But to make the injunction stick before their wedding day, which is now just 10 days away, we need something that exposes their current, frivolous use of my client's assets. We need that social proof. This brought the subplot involving Beatrice and Leo Hawthorne into sharp focus. My immediate failure and setback had made the risky social espionage necessary. I need to meet with Leo Hawthorne tonight, I decided, urgency tightening my chest. I need Beatrice to move that showing up immediately. If Serafina is hiding financial malfeasance under the guise of market optics, Leo will know how to find the cracks in her facade. He knows that world of engineered success better than anyone. Elias gave a reluctant nod. It's risky. That crowd is gossipy. If they suspect you're investigating, it could tip them off and they'll liquidate assets before the injunction hits. But yes, Adeline, we need the dirt. We need proof of their lifestyle being subsidized by your capital, and we need it today. The drive back to Beatrice's downtown studio felt heavy with the weight of my failure. I passed the bustling traffic, feeling utterly disconnected, suspended between the woman who had nurtured her son and the woman who was about to dismantle his life to save her own. Beatrice was waiting, her expression somber, when I told her about the stolen document. Her role shifted instantly from supportive friend to fellow operative. He shouldn't have done that, Addie. That's low, even for Caleb, she said, her voice laced with protective anger. We move the showing. It's tonight. A tight group. Leo will be there, looking for new clientele, new gossip. You need to focus. You are not going to look like the heartbroken mother. You're going to look like the wealthy, untouchable patron of the arts that you are. Serafina's greatest strength is her appearance of success. Tonight, we expose that weakness. The severity of the betrayal had ironically given me a cold, clear focus. My heart was broken, yes, but my resolve was forged in fire. They had stolen my paper proof, but they couldn't steal the truth. The climax was no longer just a legal fight. It was a desperate race against time to expose the antagonist's cunning before they could legally dissolve my rights forever. The emotional stakes were at their peak. I felt the powerful, chilling force of a true adversary, and I knew I had to become just as ruthless to survive. My final act of self-preservation was about to begin. The diamond necklace felt heavy on my throat, a literal weight of my success, yet it couldn't shield the chill left by a boy who stole from his own mother. I stood before the full-length mirror in my dressing room, fastening a silk, architectural sheath dress, a shade of deep, commanding sapphire blue. This wasn't a dress for a social gathering, it was armor. Elias had advised me to maintain appearances, to look untouched, powerful, and utterly in control. But beneath the silk and the cold glitter of the diamonds, my spirit felt like brittle glass, shattered by Caleb's invasion of my safe. I hadn't slept. I had spent the dark hours reviewing my life, my hands physically aching from the memory of finding the violated safe. It wasn't the theft of the paper that hurt most. Elias was right. We could use the police report as proof of malicious intent. It was the realization that Caleb, the boy I had sworn to protect from the world's harshness, had willingly become an agent of that harshness against me. A vivid memory surfaced, sharp and poignant. It was 20 years ago. I was standing in my office at the firm, staring at the final submission papers for the Santiago Library, the project that would have cemented my global reputation. Caleb, then a feverish 6-year-old with a nasty flu, was curled up miserably on a cot I'd had installed in the corner. My then-husband was conveniently unavailable. My partner walked in, holding the pen, waiting for me to sign off on the 72-hour push needed to finalize the bid. I looked at the boy, pale and whimpering, needing his mother's hand, and I looked at the pen, which represented the pinnacle of my ambition. I handed the pen back to my partner. Tell them I'm withdrawing from the final stage. My priority has changed. That was the moment I stopped being Adeline Vance, the global architectural force, and became only Adeline Vance, Caleb's mother. The theme was never clearer. Sacrifice is only meaningful if the recipient values the cost. Caleb and Serafina saw that sacrifice not as a gift of love, but as a permanent, exploitable condition of my existence. You are a selfish, bitter old woman, Adeline. Caleb's words from yesterday echoed in my mind. He was trying to project his own colossal selfishness onto me, hoping to trigger the ingrained maternal guilt that had dictated my life for decades. But now, staring into the resolute eyes of my reflection, the guilt was gone, incinerated by the fury of the break-in. My emotional evolution was complete. I was no longer grieving the loss of my son. I was mourning the illusion of who I thought he was. My mental state shifted from passive defense to aggressive design. An architect's greatest power is not building, but seeing the fatal structural flaws in another's design and knowing precisely where to place the explosive charge. They mistook your love for weakness, Adeline. I murmured to my reflection, the sapphire dress shimmering. They thought you were just a mother. They forgot you were a designer of cities. My next step, the treacherous meeting with Leo Hawthorne at Beatrice's gallery tonight, was crucial. Elias had made the necessary legal filings, the injunction petition citing fraud and illegal asset usage, but it needed teeth. Leo was the dirt source, the one who could provide context to Serafina's expensive corporate facade. I walked back to the war room, reviewing the digital file on Serafina one last time. I needed to know the pattern. Had she done this to other men? Were there other failed ventures where her family had swooped in, leveraging debt onto an unsuspecting partner? I took a deep breath, letting the scent of old wood and metallic resolve fill my lungs. I rehearsed my approach. I wouldn't ask Leo directly about Serafina. That was too crude. Instead, I would frame it as professional interest, as a powerful investor looking at the venture capital landscape. Me to Leo. Leo, what's your take on the current trend of family funds stepping in to rescue high-burn startups? I'm particularly interested in ventures where the original seed funding gets messy, say, where the original investors might not have proper paperwork. His expected response: gossip, names, and patterns. He would naturally gravitate to Serafina's history, hoping to impress me. My goal was to obtain actionable intelligence about Serafina's history with the intent to establish a pattern of predatory behavior. This information, when added to the police report and the journal entries, would give Elias the irrefutable evidence he needed to secure the injunction before the wedding in 9 days. The emotional depth of this preparation lay in the cold realization that my final act of motherhood was to dismantle my son's ambition, not out of malice, but because his alliance with Serafina would ultimately destroy him more thoroughly than any financial collapse. I grabbed my clutch, checked for my phone, and then paused, looking at the door that led to Caleb's old bedroom. The final confrontation was looming. It would be highly public, highly destructive, and entirely necessary. I was no longer fighting for my money, or even my reputation. I was fighting for the truth of my life, that Adeline Vance was not an optional expense, but a fundamental pillar. And when a pillar is compromised, the entire structure must fall. The car was waiting. It was time to stop planning the demolition and go find the fuse. Leo confirmed it. Serafina's family fund has a pattern. They prey on failing startups, inject just enough cash to seize assets, and then leave the original partners holding the debt. This isn't a wedding. It's a strategic corporate assassination that they've pulled off at least twice before. I laid out the details Leo Hawthorne had reluctantly revealed, fueled by a few glasses of excellent scotch and the chance to badmouth his ex-girlfriend's assent. The information was dynamite. Serafina was a repeat offender, using the facade of familial wealth and rescue to execute predatory acquisitions, just as Elias had suspected. We were back in Elias's office, late at night, the city lights below us glittering like scattered, useless diamonds. Beatrice was there, too, brought in not just as my confidant but as my strategic planner. She understood the power of a spectacle better than any lawyer. "This changes everything, Adeline," Elias stated, tapping the sheaf of notes I'd provided. "The pattern of behavior strengthens our case exponentially. It proves the intent wasn't just to save Caleb, but to profit from the guaranteed collapse of NovaFlow, leveraging your liability in the process. We have the motive, the method, and the victim, you. The judge will grant the emergency injunction, freezing their funds and assets before the wedding." "And when do you plan to serve the papers?" I asked, leaning forward, my voice crisp and without tremor. This was the moment I stopped defending and started designing the final sequence. Elias looked at his watch, consulting the legal deadline. "The wedding is Saturday. We will file and secure the judicial order first thing Thursday morning. We can serve the papers Friday, perhaps late afternoon, giving them just enough time to panic, but not enough time to appeal the injunction before the ceremony." "No," I interrupted, shaking my head slowly. "That's not sufficient." Elias sighed, knowing my tendency for dramatic precision. "Adeline, the goal is to secure your $10 million and dissolve your liability. Serving them the day before is effective. Serving them at the wedding is unnecessarily punitive and could risk professional backlash." "Punitive?" "Elias, they broke into my home and stole my legal evidence. They tried to financially enslave me to fund a ceremony that I am banned from attending, all to project a lie of success that they need to secure the next victim. Their entire strategy rests on market optics. We don't just file the injunction, we must destroy the optics." I looked from Elias to Beatrice, seeking confirmation. Beatrice's eyes glowed with approval. "She's right, Elias," Beatrice confirmed, the artist in her appreciating the performance. "If they receive the papers on Friday, they'll suppress the news and still go through with the wedding ceremony to save face for the investors. The moment of maximum impact, the moment that destroys the lie completely, is when the service happens in public, in front of their wealthy guests and, specifically, in front of the family fun they're trying to impress." The atmosphere in the room solidified, transitioning from a legal strategy session to a covert military operation. My determination was absolute. The theme, reclaiming one's dignity, could only be achieved by publicly dismantling the very platform built on my sacrifice. "The plan is this," I dictated, taking control of the meeting. "Elias, you file and secure the injunction Thursday. You prepare a process server to be at the venue on Saturday, the day of the wedding. And I will be there too." "You will be there?" Elias looked aghast.
Yes.
"I need to be the one to witness the structure fall. And I need to be the one who delivers the final message. They banned the mother from the wedding. They will now face the architect of the downfall." Elias ran a hand through his impeccably styled hair. "Adeline, the risk is tremendous. They could attempt a hostile confrontation. There will be security. I've designed structures taller than their security guards, Elias. I know how to navigate a space. You secure me a certified copy of the injunction, the physical document, and ensure the process server arrives precisely 10 minutes before the ceremony is scheduled to begin." My internal resolve had never been stronger. My arc was complete. I was no longer the exploited mother. I was the agent of justice. I looked at Beatrice, a slight, victorious smile touching my lips. "Beatrice, my appearance needs to be impeccable. Not grieving, not vengeful. I need to look like the only truly wealthy and powerful person in the room. I need to wear a dress that suggests I could buy the entire venue, the entire wedding, and perhaps Serafina's family fund as a casual afternoon expense. It needs to be the architectural opposite of their flimsy structure." Beatrice nodded, already visualizing the perfect, devastating ensemble. "Consider it done, Addie. We will choose a color that photographs with brutal clarity. You will be the living, breathing centerpiece of their worst nightmare." The finality of the decision was exhilarating. The plot was barreling toward the climax. The next time Caleb saw me, it wouldn't be across my dining room table, but across the extravagant aisle of a wedding built on a lie. And I would be holding the piece of paper that proved his shame and secured my future. The final design was ready. "I'm sorry, madam, but your name is not on the manifest. We have strict instructions for a guest list that is absolutely final." The security guard, imported and wearing a suit far too expensive for his job, said this with a practiced, smooth certainty that usually works on unwanted guests. But he wasn't dealing with an unwanted guest. He was dealing with the woman who paid for his bespoke uniform. The wedding was set in a private, historic villa deep in the rolling hills of Tuscany. If you've ever seen a postcard for extreme wealth, this was it. Ancient stone, manicured cypress trees, and a temporary glass pavilion erected over a Renaissance fountain, designed to house 500 of Serafina's most important social pawns. The setting itself screamed, "Look at how successful we are." And every dollar spent here was a dollar of my unreturned capital. I was standing at the threshold, impeccably dressed in the deep sapphire gown Beatrice had sourced, a dress that looked quiet but cost more than most cars. I had decided against a dramatic entrance with the lawyer. I needed to enter as the ghost of the party, the silent, structural flaw in their perfect facade. I ignored the guard's outstretched hand and held my gaze steady, letting the full force of Adeline Vance, the retired master architect, settle on him. "I understand your list is final," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but carrying the unmistakable weight of command. "I am not a guest. I am the principal creditor. You will call the head planner immediately and inform her that Adeline Vance is here to inspect the temporary structural supports on the glass pavilion." There were significant discrepancies in the load-bearing calculations from the final vendor receipts, and since I am financially responsible for every asset on this property, I require immediate access. Failure to comply is a direct violation of the event's insurance policy. The guard blinked. He was trained to handle drunken relatives, not technical liability threats. His smooth confidence evaporated, replaced by frantic uncertainty. That's the beauty of my training. I don't threaten with emotion. I threaten with collapse. The word insurance did the trick. While he frantically dialed, I took a moment, letting the sensory details of the venue wash over me. The air was thick with the scent of white roses and expensive French perfume, masking the faint, earthy smell of old stone and desperation. The tables were set with staggering precision, gold-rimmed plates awaiting a feast I wasn't meant to share. And somewhere, my son, Caleb, was preparing to exchange vows, committing his life to the woman who was systematically ruining him. My internal turmoil had hardened into a cold, clear focus. There was no more maternal guilt, only righteous professional fury.
You stole from me.
You violated my home. You banned me. The actions had freed me. This was the turning point in my character arc, shedding the skin of the sacrificing mother to become the protective warrior of my own life. The head planner, a stick-thin woman named Chiara, whose entire career depended on Serafina's approval, rushed over, her face a mask of professionally managed terror. Ms. Vance. What an unbelievable surprise. This is impossible, you know. The bride and groom, they were very clear. No immediate family until the reception. I told her guard, Chiara. I am here to verify the safety compliance of that structure, I stated, pointing an elegant, accusatory finger at the pavilion. My legal team is on standby. Are you willing to stake your reputation and your firm's liability on the structural integrity of that temporary glass ceiling? Because I am not. I need 5 minutes inside that pavilion alone. Chiara hesitated, her eyes darting between me and the main entrance, clearly looking for Serafina's private security detail. The tension in the relationship was palpable. She feared Serafina's wrath, but she feared the legal threat of structural collapse even more. 5 minutes. That is all I can give you, she whispered, clutching her clipboard like a lifeline. But please, Ms. Vance, you must remain discreet. She ushered me through a back entrance and into the glass pavilion. It was breathtakingly beautiful, an architectural wonder of temporary assembly, and utterly dependent on my money. I walked slowly down the aisle, the heavy silk whispering against the marble. I wasn't looking at the floral arrangements. I was looking at the calculated placement of the lighting, the massive projection screen that would undoubtedly show Serafina's carefully curated, debt-fueled lifestyle reel. The setting perfectly amplified the drama, a stage of profound illusion about to be shattered by reality. As I reached the altar, I pulled out my phone. I wasn't calling Elias yet. He was still 15 minutes out, driving the final document, the official injunction, to the remote location. I was texting Beatrice. Me. At the altar. It's beautiful. They will be devastated. Beatrice, do not engage. Stay silent. Remember the plan. I walked back up the aisle, my heart beating with a steady, relentless rhythm. Just as I reached the exit, the massive mahogany doors to the main chapel, where the guests were beginning to arrive, creaked open. And there was Serafina. She was walking down the aisle, not in her wedding dress, but in a pristine white silk robe, radiating pre-ceremony perfection. She was accompanied by 2 stern-looking, older men, her Uncle Paul and the lawyer for the family fund. She saw me instantly. Her perfect, angelic composure didn't just crack, it pulverized. Her eyes widened, instantly betraying the cunning she usually kept so tightly controlled. Adeline, what in the hell are you doing here? Chiara, get her out. Now, she shrieked, the sound echoing off the marble floors, ruining the carefully curated silence. I stopped, just 10 feet from her, and smiled. Not the warm smile of a mother, but the cold, predatory smile of an architect who knows the exact moment the detonation sequence begins. Hello, Serafina, I said, my voice steady, loud enough for her uncle and her lawyer to hear. I just came to check on the structural integrity of the venue. It's a beautiful spectacle, but you know, structures built on fraudulent capital tend to collapse under the slightest pressure. Serafina's face went white. She lunged forward, her perfect hands outstretched, poised to physically grab me. The climax had begun. I knew the lawyer, Elias, was pulling up to the main gate right now. The plot was at its peak. The moment of destruction was seconds away. Serafina was about to learn that Adeline Vance was not just the mother she banned, but the force of nature she should have never crossed. Serafina's hand was inches from my shoulder, her eyes blazing with a hatred so pure it felt like physical heat, when a voice like thunder rolled through the glass pavilion. "Do not touch my client, Ms. Dubois. This is a matter of legal record, and any physical confrontation will be reported to the Italian authorities immediately." The mahogany doors to the chapel swung open wider, and there he was, Elias Thorne, looking less like a lawyer and more like an avenging angel in his perfectly tailored suit. He wasn't alone. Just behind him strode a short, stern-faced man holding a sheaf of documents tied with official judicial ribbon, the process server. The guests, who had just been settling into the pews, craned their necks, muttering. The curated silence of the wealthy elite had been annihilated, replaced by the deafening sound of an implosion. Serafina froze, the fury draining instantly from her face, leaving behind a sick, hollow pallor. She knew that suit. She knew that voice. The appearance of Elias Thorne meant one thing. The legal fortress she had so carefully constructed was now under demolition. "Elias, what is the meaning of this intrusion?" demanded Uncle Paul, the family fund lawyer who had been standing beside Serafina, his face turning the color of port wine. He was clearly the one guiding this whole operation. Elias walked directly past Serafina and fixed his gaze squarely on Uncle Paul. "Mr. Dubois, I am here on behalf of my client, Adeline Vance, to serve an emergency temporary injunction issued by the High Court, halting the transfer of all assets and freezing NovaFlow's operational funds until a full financial accounting can be completed." He gestured to the process server. The short man stepped forward with an almost grim ceremony and slapped the stack of documents directly into Uncle Paul's rigid hands. The sound was loud, sharp, echoing across the marble floor. "The basis for this order," Elias continued, his voice resonating with authority, "is clear evidence of malicious fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and illegal asset utilization, specifically the use of Ms. Vance's $10 million in secured loan capital to fund a variety of non-business, personal lifestyle expenses, and, critically, this wedding. We are also citing the police report confirming the break-in and theft of evidence from Ms. Vance's residence." The words fraud, illegal, theft hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Every guest who mattered, every investor, every potential victim was listening. Serafina's perfect optical illusion was shattering. Serafina let out a sound, a high, unnatural gasp, and crumpled slightly, leaning heavily on Uncle Paul. "This is a lie. It's slander. She's a disgruntled ex-investor trying to sabotage the wedding. Serafina, be silent." Uncle Paul roared, his fury directed at her incompetence rather than my truth. He skimmed the first page of the injunction, his eyes bugging out as he saw the legal gravity of the situation. The papers clearly detailed the money trail, the connection to the penthouse, and the expenses charged to NovaFlow. Then my eyes locked on Caleb. He was standing in the shadows just inside the chapel, presumably waiting for his call to the pavilion, now frozen in place, pale and utterly ruined. He wasn't wearing his expensive tuxedo yet, just the crisp white shirt and slacks, looking like a little boy caught stealing from the cookie jar. The shame and horror on his face were a moment of crushing, terrible catharsis for me. This was the moment of my character transformation. I walked past the shocked Serafina, past the furious Uncle Paul, and stopped directly in front of Caleb. The air was buzzing with the sound of collapsing ambition. "You chose this, Caleb," I said, my voice quiet, almost mournful, yet strong enough to be heard by the closest guests. "You were willing to trade your mother's entire financial security, her dignity, and her love for this, for a lie built on fraud." I reached into my clutch and pulled out the small, leather-bound journal, the physical evidence they had tried to steal.
"I didn't give it to him."
I just held it up, a symbol of the truth he had tried to bury. "I was willing to give you the $10 million for your wedding, Caleb. I was willing to let NovaFlow fail. But when you broke into my home and stole from me, you declared that my life, my history, and my love were worthless. You forced me to choose between my motherhood and my personhood." I let the words sink in, watching the realization dawn on his face that his ambition had finally cost him everything. The beautiful glass pavilion suddenly felt like a courtroom, and he was the defendant. I am not here to ruin your wedding, Caleb. I am here to stop the structural failure of my own life. This is not about revenge. This is about self-preservation. And I will not allow you or Serafina to use my name to fund your fraud. I handed the journal to Elias. Then, I turned my back on my son, on his ruined fiancé, and on the wreckage of their ambition. I walked back down the aisle, past the horrified guests, the scent of white roses now smelling sickeningly sweet. As I reached the threshold, I heard Serafina's voice, high-pitched and hysterical, screaming at Caleb. "You idiot! You signed nothing." She didn't sign the release. We're ruined. I didn't look back. The tension had peaked. The plot had resolved its immediate, climactic crisis. I was out. Stepping into the warm Tuscan sunlight, away from the chaos, I felt the heavy diamond necklace suddenly feel light. The fight was far from over. The legal battle would drag on for months, but the emotional war was won. I had stared into the face of their betrayal and refused to fold. The architect had designed her masterpiece. The structure of their life was destroyed, and Adeline Vance was finally free. The resolution felt like the first clean breath I had taken in years. The sound of the heavy, armored SUV door closing was the most expensive silence I had ever bought. It wasn't just the cessation of Serafina's high-pitched screaming or Uncle Paul's legal threats. It was the definitive separation between the wreckage I had left behind and the future I was driving toward. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel the adrenaline crash. I felt an immense, terrifying lightness, the way a skyscraper feels just after the final structural load has been transferred, leaving the foundations settled and free of strain. I looked back through the tinted window as we sped down the ancient Italian road. The villa was a blur of pale stone and cypress, a monument to a wedding that would now be remembered only as the day the family fund went into lockdown and the groom's mother dropped the fraud charges. I immediately called Elias, who had already left the property and was waiting for the process server's confirmation that the official documentation was secured. "It's done, Adeline. The injunction is executed. Novaflow's assets are frozen, the buyout is off, and Serafina's family fund is paralyzed. They can't touch a dime of that $10 million, and more importantly, your liability for their debt is completely dissolved. The theft of the incorporation papers is now irrelevant. The police report and the journal are sufficient evidence of their intent to defraud." The subplot of the stolen document, the great source of my vulnerability in Chapter 6, was now closed, rendered moot by Elias's legal precision. My privacy had been violated, but the strategic advantage was gone. "And Caleb?" I asked, the name feeling like ash on my tongue. Elias hesitated. He was distraught. Honestly, Adeline, he looked like a child whose favorite toy had been smashed. But that's good. It means he's facing the reality that the money and Serafina's protection is gone. The secondary goal is achieved. We protected him from his own bad judgment by removing his enabler. I needed to connect with Beatrice, my co-conspirator and friend. I sent her a brief text. "Structure is sound. Facade destroyed." Her reply came instantly. "The sapphire was magnificent, Addie. Get home. We drink to new blueprints." Her reaction brought a tiny, genuine smile to my face. The support of my friend, who understood that this was not malice but necessary self-surgery, was the stabilizing force I needed. As we reached the highway, the emotional consequences of my actions started to surface, not as sorrow, but as profound regret. The regret wasn't for the action, but for the necessity of it. I had spent 2 decades believing that if I poured enough love, money, and sacrifice into Caleb, I could compensate for the broken structures of his childhood. Today proved that love, when transactional, only creates greater debt.
My phone rang.
It was Caleb. I stared at the name on the screen, feeling the cold, clinical resolution I'd cultivated over the past 2 weeks. I answered.
"Mom."
"What did you do?" "You destroyed everything. Uncle Paul is threatening to sue me personally. The guests are leaving. The entire day is ruined." I knew you'd do this, you selfish old. Stop, Caleb. I cut him off, my voice steady, no longer carrying the maternal tremor of my earlier conversations. The only thing that destroyed your wedding was the lie on which it was built. And you and Serafina were the architects of that lie. He transitioned instantly from anger to tearful desperation. It was just a loan, Mom. We would have paid you back. Why would you humiliate me like this? You banned me from your firm. You banned me from your life. And now you ban me from my future. I'm ruined, Mom. I banned you from nothing, Caleb. I clarified, my final lesson to him delivered with crystalline clarity. You banned me from your life the moment you treated me as a liability to be signed away. I filed the injunction not because I was uninvited, but because you hired a thief to break into my home to cover up your fraud. That was the line you crossed. I knew the conversation was futile. He wasn't ready for reconciliation. He was still consumed by the consequences. He still blamed the wrecking ball, not the shoddy construction. This is what self-preservation looks like, Caleb. It looks like the $10 million coming back to my bank account, not funding a lie. When you are ready to talk about the truth, and not the money, you call me. Until then, the relationship is suspended, just like your funds. I hung up, silencing the emotional noise permanently. The catharsis was complete. The primary theme was resolved. Adeline Vance had reclaimed her personal agency and her financial worth. The secondary conflicts, the fear of ruin, the pressure from Serafina, were dissolved. I leaned back against the leather seat, closing my eyes. I was 64 years old. I had just lost my only child to his own greed, but for the first time in decades, I felt entirely free. The future was not about fixing Caleb. It was about blueprint creation again. The resolution was clear. My next step was to design my own life, a structure built not on sacrifice, but on my own, unshakable foundation. I had a phone call to make to my old architectural firm. It was time to build again. 3 months after the Italian demolition, I was back at the drafting table, but this time, the scent of cedar and graphite didn't smell like nostalgia. It smelled like potential. I had leased a penthouse office downtown, high above the chaos of a city I once only viewed from my suburban ivory tower. The walls were lined not with awards, but with fresh, conceptual sketches for the Project Phoenix, my first major bid in 25 years, an urban renewal contract that would redefine the city's waterfront. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was rebuilding a city, just as I had rebuilt myself, piece by meticulous piece. The legal fallout from the wedding day drama, the spectacular collapse of Caleb and Serafina's illusion, was finally winding down. Elias had executed the legal coup with ruthless efficiency. The $10 million, plus the 3 years of accrued interest, had been successfully repatriated to my account. NovaFlow was officially dissolved, and the debt liability, which Serafina's family had tried to pin on me, remained squarely with them. Serafina and Caleb were facing a tangle of litigation. Their engagement, predictably, had dissolved amidst the financial wreckage and mutual recriminations. Serafina, the architect of the fraud, was now busy engineering a comeback story for her social media, desperately trying to polish a tarnished reputation. And Caleb? He had reached out. Many times.
His calls were different now.
No more threats, no more emotional blackmail. The initial calls were frantic, demanding, but they slowly transitioned to shame-filled pleas for help. Not financial help, but professional. He was trying to find work, any work, and the NovaFlow disaster, now a cautionary tale in the venture capital world, had blacklisted him. I finally agreed to meet him, not at my home, and certainly not at the magnificent new office, but in a neutral, sterile downtown cafe. He looked different. The entitled swagger was gone, replaced by a defeated slump. He wore a cheap, ill-fitting suit, and he avoided my gaze. "I was wrong, Mom," he mumbled into his lukewarm coffee, the first words that mattered in months. "I know I was wrong about the money. I know I was wrong about the stealing. Serafina, she convinced me that you were just a signature, an obstacle we had to bypass." I looked at him, searching for the boy I had lost, and finding only a broken man. The emotional satisfaction of winning the lawsuit was now muted by the reality of his failure. There was no grand cinematic reconciliation, no immediate hug or tearful apology that would magically mend 20 years of exploitation. Serafina may have convinced you of the method, Caleb, but you convinced yourself of the motive. I replied, my voice steady, carrying the weight of my realized truth. You believed my love was unconditional, and therefore, without value. You believed you were entitled to my life, simply because I was your mother. That is the lesson you must learn, not the legal terms. He nodded slowly, finally meeting my eyes, which were clear and unforgiving. I lost everything, Mom. My future. My reputation. No, Caleb, I said, picking up my empty coffee cup. You lost the lie. You didn't lose everything because I kept your safety net intact. You still have an education, health, and a family name that, until 3 months ago, meant something. The $10 million that came back to me is not your inheritance anymore. It is my insurance policy for my retirement and the capital for my new firm. The cost of your mistake was your banishment from the entitlement you expected. That was the closure. I was defining the relationship on my terms. I wasn't banishing him entirely, but I was banishing the maternal guilt that had controlled my life. Before I left, I reached into my bag and pulled out a single, unmarked white envelope. It wasn't a check. It contained the contact information for an excellent career counselor I used years ago, a woman who specialized in rebuilding lives after high-profile failures. This is not a financial gift, Caleb. It's a tool. I'm not signing your documents anymore, but I am providing you with the blueprint to build your own future, brick by brick. You build the structure. I am no longer your foundation. I stood up. I didn't wait for his response or for thanks. I simply walked away, leaving him alone at the table, clutching the white envelope. The feeling was a sharp, clean ache, the necessary pain of setting a broken bone. Stepping back onto the street, I felt the crisp autumn air on my face, the sensory detail of the city, the rumble of the subway beneath my feet, the smell of street food, the rush of people going somewhere, doing something, felt electric. I was one of them again, an active participant, not a passive spectator in my own son's drama. I took the elevator up to my new office. The panoramic view of the skyline was breathtaking. I walked over to my drafting table, where the conceptual sketches for Project Phoenix lay waiting. My hand, which had trembled in Chapter 4 from emotional exhaustion, now moved with the steady, precise authority of a master builder. The transformation was complete. I had faced the ultimate betrayal and survived. The theme was not just clarified, it was embodied. Adeline Vance's greatest construction was not a skyscraper, but the reconstruction of her own self-worth. If there is a future story, it's not about revenge, it's about legacy. It's about the towers I'm building now, the ones that carry my name, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that the cost of reclaiming my life, though painful, was worth every single cent. The mother was gone, but the architect, the true self, had finally returned home. My future was bright, vast, and structurally sound. And I was the designer,